Welcome into this discography dossier in which we look at and rank the 5 albums by the Police. So let's get started. I am Thirdmango. I'm a media and cultural sociologist. I grew up, when it comes to music, my mom and dad were sort of just into classical. My dad was a little bit into classic rock, but since I was the oldest, it was sort of up to me to find my own music. And so one of my favorite bands growing up was someone introduced me to Fish. And so I got really into jam bands in the 90s and sort of the rock of the 90s. And over time, I've become a pretty big expert on music overall. But the Police, for me, is one of my biggest blind spots. Before doing this project, I hadn't listened to a single Police album all the way through. I was definitely aware of, some of their big hits, Every Breath You Take, Roxanne, but for the most part, it was largely, I just sort of knew of them from different things. I knew of Sting from one of my favorite movies is Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels. Um, but the way that we'll start here is how I was introduced to the Police, and it is through a way that most people were probably not introduced to the Police. So this is my discography dossier. We're going to do this in sort of a ranking format, where we're going to go through and rank each of the albums and talk about it. And you tell me if I'm right or wrong, and give me your opinions as well. So let's get it started. So most of my knowledge on the Police comes from a band called Oysterhead. Now you're thinking, Oysterhead, what? I don't think I've even heard of Oysterhead. So Oysterhead was a supergroup that had one album called The Grand Pecking Order. Oysterhead consisted of 3 members: the guitarist, Trey Anastasio of Fish, the bassist, Les Claypool of Primus. Now, I had seen both of those artists live in the 90s. The drummer, Stuart Copeland of the Police. So, this one off album was my introduction to Stuart Copeland. I I was already a huge fan of Fish, already a huge fan of Primus. I loved this album. So I was like, well, obviously the Stuart Copeland guy is probably pretty good. I had sort of knew Sting. Obviously, I knew him from movies, but I didn't really know any of his solo output. And so when it comes to a lot of my opinions as I go through this band, it really is sort of, I seem to side on the side of Copeland. I saw his Drumeo appearance before I started this project as well, and that's sort of where I learned about sort of that, both of them being very vocal voices within the band and essentially having arguments throughout. And I think I'm definitely sort of more on the Copeland side. So let's, with that all in mind, let's go into my official rankings. So coming in at number 5 is the debut album Outlandos d'Amour from 1978. Apologies if I said that incorrectly. This is definitely a debut album. I still really like it overall, and from the jump, the song Next to You really surprised me. It has this really fun punk rock feel, and immediately I didn't expect it. This is a punk band? What's going on? I'm used to like Every Breath You Take, sort of that sort of ballady 80s sort of, new wave feel. I didn't expect a punk band to come out of this. And yet, sort of as this album goes on, it's a lot more sort of a punk rock feel, very, blues inspiration, raw energy. Uh, it was such an interesting album to take a listen to. Of course, we got to talk about Roxanne. It's a hit. It deserves to be. Classic song. But hearing it in succession behind Next to You and So Lonely put it in such a new light for me. I didn't realize that this was from their debut album. And so, having that sort of a late 70s punk vibe really gave Roxanne more of an edge to me. And I ended up liking it more. I've honestly listened to it more since doing this project than I did pre the project. So, the reason why this is in last place overall, first half of the album, really good, really excellent. Excellent. Second half, pretty boring. The song "Be My Girl Sally" is my least favorite song by the Police overall. So, it does have a lot of really awesome bangers, front loaded, a bunch of filler at the end. So, overall, still, strong 4 out of 5 stars to get started. Shows that if this is the bottom end of their music, I ended up liking this band quite a bit. So, let's get into number 4. And once again, we're going chronologically because it's going to be Regatta de Blanc. I can definitely feel the musicianship of the artists in this. Sting's lyrics aren't always amazing, but you can definitely tell how much craft they're taking in the overall arrangement of the songs. Copeland is shining on this album. The drumming he's doing on this shows real complexities and shows why he's one of the best to do it. I had heard Message in a Bottle in passing, but had never really listened to it all the way through, and God, true banger. Some of the complexities going on in this song showcase how incredible these guys were doing just 2 albums in. Once again, like the debut album, the best songs are front-loaded, and the back end not really as tight as I'd like it to be. The sleeper song on the album, though, is the song Deathwise. It's got really interesting complexities and a good sustaining groove throughout. It's one of their lowest in terms of Spotify listens, and so that surprised me because it was one of my favorites on the album. But overall, I find myself digging the instruments, especially throughout this album, and for the most part, just sort of ignoring the lyrical content. It's showing that I'm definitely Team Copeland at this point. I don't really get the song Walking on the Moon. It's clearly the second most popular song on the album, but it felt largely boring to me. The real dips on the album, though, were On Any Other Day and Does Everyone Stare. So again, overall, 4-star album, just barely over the debut in terms of quality. Even though it doesn't have as many individual songs that I was super into. So, third place. Jumping out of chronological order, 1981's Ghost in the Machine. Obviously, we have to start with Every Little Thing She Does Is Magic. Clearly, absolute banger. There's a reason why this was a hit. I do like when famous songs are famous for a reason, and this is one of those that still, interesting song. It hits a good pop angle. It showcases complexities throughout, giving new songs throughout. I keep getting lost in the interesting choices and the way the songs speed up and slow down. To me, it's sort of like their modern contemporary would sort of be like late 90s Radiohead with this song, sort of, changing genre throughout a journey of a song. So besides this song, what surprised me the most and has gotten regular rotation in the past couple of weeks was One World, Not Three. This one specifically showcases Copeland and his mastery on the drums, especially the back half of the song, really gives Copeland room to shine. The album is interesting because it almost feels like they had just listened to Madness right before this, and it sort of has the first inklings of a ska album, which again, I just didn't expect the Police to be sort of this early proto version of ska. Like, it's just not the sound I expected from these guys. The songs that really surprised me, Hungry for You and Demolition Man, both feel like they could be songs on modern ska records. Like, it's just not a sound I expected. So once again, 4 stars from this one. Good middle of the road, really hit me with some songs I didn't expect. And so and also just sort of the music industry, what was going on at 1981, makes this a really interesting album overall. So in second place, we're going to go back a year to 1980's Zenyatta Mondada. Once again, this does start off with the mega hit in Don't Stand So Close to Me. Starts off really getting into what was happening in the 80s with adding in that new wave element. So sort of mixing in sort of that punk vibe that they were doing, and then adding in sort of that new wave synth. It's funny for me because I had assumed that Don't Stand So Close to Me came out around 1985, right around like Aha's Take on Me. It felt sort of like a contemporary song in my head. I didn't realize that it came out 5 years earlier. And so, having that as an experience was very interesting. The other song that I did recognize and also really enjoyed was Dee Doo 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 Dee Da Da Da. And like I said, with Ghost in the Machine, this gets into sort of a pre-ska sort of dub rock vibe. Like really putting in interesting grooves, creating sort of this punk ska vibe that I just never expected. Again, with the Dee Doo 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 Dee Da Da Da, again, sort of showcases that Sting's lyrical output, for me personally, not really there. I love the way he sings, and I love the complexities that he's doing notes-wise, but I'm not really as into the content that he's putting across. So the sleeper song for me on this one is the second song, Driven to Tears. It starts off with an incredible groove and has been a song that's come up more times in my car. And every time it does, I don't skip it. It's such a good sort of car groove song to listen to along the highway. So this is the first 4.5 out of 5 at this point. And overall, in terms of consistency across the album, this is my favorite album. It's not my favorite album overall, but the consistency across the whole album is definitely my big thumbs up for this album. So then, probably comes as no surprise, my number one album by The Police, Synchronicity. 5 stars, tour de force. Overall, again, it isn't as cohesive from track to track as Zenyatta Mondada, but when it comes to pure songs and instrumentation, I just have to give it up for this album. Oddly enough, the only song I knew from before was Every Breath You Take. And we'll get into that in a sec, but first, the way the album starts with Synchronicity 1 is just sublime. It instantly gets into this dynamic, pulse-pounding song which leans heavily into complexity and showcases how good this band is when they're almost sort of trying to outdo each other. Like, it almost felt like Sting and Copeland were fighting with each other, but still creating something masterful in that sort of dynamic. Copeland, dynamite on this track. The synths, the bass, the drums, the way that Sting sings throughout the whole song is such a badass vibe. And then compare that to the absolute banger of Synchronicity 2. And God, it makes both of them a pair of pulse-pounding, interesting, punk-infused new wave that just makes this album an absolute masterpiece for 1983. Obviously, Every Breath You Take, among their best songs overall. Lyrically, weird, a little insane, but the instrumentation and the overall arrangement, is to die for. So it's not my favorite song of theirs overall, but still up there, incredible. The other songs which really hit me and surprised me were King of Pain, Wrapped Around My Finger, and Oh My God. Oh My God actually sort of reminds me a little of Talking Heads, which is probably my favorite band from this era of music. And so, having sort of that mix in there sort of really, really got me going with this album. So overall, this album blew my fragile little mind. It's so interesting to me that this was sort of the peak of the band and also the unraveling. That this was essentially where Copeland and Sting were just absolutely fighting at this point, and after this album came out and became a huge success, they were like, all right, that's it. We need to part. And so ultimately crazy that this was their undoing, because it's such a good album. The biggest misstep, however, is the song Mother, which is sort of a decently fun song instrumentation wise, but the lyrics are so dumb, it just completely takes me out. So, oddly, that's it for the Police. Like, it's so interesting that that's where they end. A band which really surprised me going into punk, ska, and dub angles that I just never expected before coming into this. That's why I'm really enjoying doing a project like this, because sometimes that, I expected much more of sort of a slow jam band. I didn't expect a sort of a ska dub, punk vibe coming off of this band. So let's look at the official rankings. Fifth, Outlandos de Amor. Fourth, Regatta de Blanc. Third, Ghost in the Machine. Second, Zenyatta Mondata. And first, Synchronicity. So what do you think? Where are you ranking all of these? Am I correct in my assessment? Again, I'm super curious about this because, this is essentially my first foray into the Police. So I'm curious what some of the more long-term fans have sort of come through consensus on the career. I considered going into Sting's career, but thought if I do so, it should be its own video, because clearly at this point I'm Team Copeland, and I know next to nothing about Sting. Again, Sting is also very much my blind spot. I can't off the top of my head, honestly, remember any of the songs that he's done. I know a lot about sort of what happened with The Emperor's New Groove in terms of Sting, but that's about it. I know him more for his movie output than I do for his solo career. So should I do a deep dive on Sting? What other bands would you like me to sort of rank? And I would love if in the comments you put your rankings as well. So I'm still a small fledgling YouTube channel, still getting my start. I have a pretty consistent following on Twitch, but I'm trying to sort of get started on YouTube. So if you could drop me a subscription, I'd really appreciate it. Really appreciate the likes. Really appreciate you coming in, comments and everything. So I have been Thirdmango. If you want to go check me out on Twitch, it's also at Thirdmango. Same username. We play a music game on Sundays and Thursdays, sort of a pub quiz, guess the music guessing game that goes a couple hours. So come on by. Thanks for coming in. Thanks for dropping by. We'll see you in the next one.